Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for tonight's event. My name is Rachel, and I'm a marketing coordinator here at Powell's Books in Portland, Oregon. Before we begin, I want to encourage you to check out our lineup of upcoming virtual events by visiting our website at powells.com. In the coming weeks, we're looking forward to welcoming Kendra Atlework, Lisa Hannibal, and Megan Margulies. Please remember to follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And if you haven't already done so, you can sign up for our weekly events email at powells.com. Tonight, we're honored to welcome Kate Elliott and Kit Rocha. Kate Elliott has been writing science fiction and fantasy for 30 years after bursting onto the scene with Duran. She is best known for her Crown of Stars epic fantasy series and the New York Times bestselling young adult fantasy Court of Fives. She lives in Hawaii, where she paddles outrigger canoes and spoils her schnauzer. With Unconquerable Sun, Elliott brings us a thrilling new science fiction adventure set in a rich universe full of political intrigue. It's the gender-spun story of Alexander the Great, rife with romance and political intrigue, and set in an interstellar world where the sky is not the limit. Kate Elliott is joined by Kit Rocha, the pseudonym for author duo Donna Herron and Bree Bridges. They are best known for the gritty and sexy dystopian Beyond series, and were the first indie authors to receive a Romantic Times Reviewer's Choice Award. They currently live 3 miles apart in Alabama and spend their non-writing time caring for a menagerie of animals and crafting handmade jewelry, all of which is chronicled on their various social media accounts. Orphan Black meets the post-apocalyptic Avengers and best-selling author duo Kit Rocha's new novel, Deal with the Devil. Nina is an information broker with a mission. She and her team of mercenary librarians must use their knowledge to save the hopeless in a crumbling America. This evening's event will also include a Q&A. Please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen if you'd like to ask a question. If someone has typed a question that you'd also like to know the answer to, please consider upvoting that particular question. And most importantly, please consider supporting all of these authors and Powell's by purchasing a copy of their books. A link to buy Unconquerable Sun and Deal with the Devil will be shared in the chat a few times this evening. And without any further ado, please welcome Kate and Kit Rocha.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you. How are you doing tonight,
Thank
Kate?
I am not tonight. I am afternoon. And I see the trade winds are up. I can see them out my window. They're blowing in their normal way. And how is it there on the mainland, as we call it here?
It is raining in Alabama.
Swampy.
Yes, it's liquid
Swampy
outside.
here.
Well,
So
that's all I have to say about that.
yeah, not so interesting.
It's really not. But it's Friday night.
It is Friday night, and here we are. And we can talk about anything we want, right?
Yes, we can. Yes, we can.
We've been plotting this one for a while, haven't we?
We have. We've discussed, yes, we've discussed talking about ensemble casts and the philosophical basis of science fiction and sex.
Yes. And that's a big one. I actually sort of cranky tweeted earlier this week, and it went a little wild.
When do you not cranky tweet?
I do cranky tweet a lot. That is
a lot.
That is a hobby of mine. But this particular one was about how we really just devalue joyful, consensual sex in books, and elevate books that are, sort of miserable and torturous and, not great. Especially sci-fi and fantasy have a history, which we were discussing on Twitter. I don't know, a month or two. Time doesn't mean anything anymore.
No. Yeah, actually, I have, oh, wow. So you guys will have to stop me, but I have so much to say about this because I first started publishing 30 years ago. And I guarantee that, there wasn't much sex. I mean, Jacqueline, it's not that there wasn't any, but it was mostly written from a very particular point of view, almost exclusively from the male gaze. Even female characters were described, oftentimes women would write characters, their female characters with a male gaze on them because that was so embedded in how people looked at it.
Yeah, I mean, if that's all you know, like if that's what you've read, because that's all that's been out there, then yeah, you're going to unconsciously parrot it. Like we all do that every
Yeah.
single day. And that's why it's so important to, examine this stuff.
Right. And be conscious of it. Just be aware that I think women have to be described like this because that's how women are described. And then it becomes this circle that you never break out of. I like to give credit to Catherine Asaro back in the 90s, I'm going to say. And it's not that I'm not saying she's the first, but just she made a big impact on me personally by saying, hey, romance and science fiction is a great way to expand story. And in the science fiction world, which was very much manly man, hard science fiction is, better than that fantasy stuff or that soft science fiction stuff, that was looked down on. You didn't want that squishy, girly stuff. And this gets back to what you tweeted, Bree, which is that talking about sex in a positive way was not very mature or important. That all that was important was sexual violence and edginess and pain and suffering. That was, in this view, that's kind of what I took in. That was what was mattered. And it's amazing how long it's taken the field, from my perspective, to start digging that away and to say, hey, no, consensual sex is just as important, maybe more important.
Oh, shocking. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like people don't have to be hurt for us to learn about, human nature or about, our wants and needs and our drives and our universe. Like we don't actually have to hurt people to do that.
Unless they want it and consent to it,
Right. Well,
But and here's the thing. For a long time, I didn't know that was what science fiction and fantasy like majority was, because I sort of had this lucky stumbling in. My first fantasy book was a Mercedes Lackey book. Mm-hmm. And then I discovered your books and Melanie Ron, and I read lots of, Tanya Huff and Jennifer Roberson. Like I read Tamara Pierce. I read all of these women. And so for me, that had always defined the fantasy genre. And a lot of them, and like you said, it's not, we were discussing actually a couple months ago on Twitter, how I loved Anne McCaffrey. But when I went back as an adult, I was like, yikes, yikes.
But even so, Anne McCaffrey created an important bridge, because her stuff is, I haven't gone back and reread it because it was so important to me back in the day. Women feeling sexual desire, right? And getting sex and being powerful, with, getting dragons. I don't want to go back and reread those because I know I would probably be a little horrified now. But at the same time, she was doing something that was creating that bridge that the rest of us could continue building.
Yep. And
that's also like, and this is something that we talked about and then decided to put a pin in it because we wanted to discuss it tonight. When we talk about the history of romance, because romance has such a reputation outside the genre, it's the bodice rippers. It's, I was a computer programmer, and when I quit that job to write romance, so many people were like, what happened to you? You feminist betrayer. You're going to go write these patriarchy books that are all about rape and, So romance has a reputation outside the genre that is very defined by this brief period where it wasn't even okay to write about women wanting to have sex. It's barely okay to write about it now. If you go and read our reviews, women who consent excitedly to sex are these heroines. They take a beating in a lot of reviews still. People still don't want that. It's slutty and it's not, makes you a bad person. And so for a long time, that was sort of the way they got around it. It had to be okay for her to enjoy it. So she had to say no, and then she said yes. And like, that was one of those Anne McCaffrey things. I went back and, found that in there a lot. That was a big theme. She said no,
Yeah.
but then she liked it. So it was okay.
That's the old forced seduction trope.
Yeah.
Which we now see, understandably, as problematic. But back in the day, it allowed women to feel pleasure. I mean, when
it was
I'm
the
getting
loophole.
bombed.
Yes, yeah.
It was they needed that loophole because there was no way they were going to be able to like write about it any other way. And I think that, like, you know, as far as like the reputation of romance, I mean, like, there's such a dichotomy there because it has a reputation that is both deserved and woefully undeserved, you know. I mean, like, yeah, we had the bodice rippers, we had the forced seduction, but still, like, was any of that worse or different than what was being portrayed in other genres and subgenres? Especially, like, you know, in genre fiction, that was more an artifact of time period than of romance itself, you know. I mean, I wish that it had changed more in all other genres, but I think sometimes it's, you know, in romance we had to have a bit of like a reckoning with it, that some genres have really, they got to sidestep, you know, they got to bob and weave around it, and so they haven't really encountered that. And I think that that's sort of just here recently been something that like sci-fi and fantasy has, you know, really tackled or begun to tackle.
No,
I'm done.
Sorry. I don't want to like stomp me. I'm so passionate about this subject. But back in the day, I can tell this story. So there used to be this thing called the SIFWA Forum, which was where the people who belonged to the Science Fiction Writers of America could write to each other. And then there was the bulletin was a public face, and the forum was where they could write to each other, right? And this was before social media. So it was a printed magazine that would come out 4 times a year. So you would have these very slow motion discussions. But at some point, and I believe this had to have been in the 90s, a couple of romance writers who had decided to make this move into writing romantic fantasy and romantic science fiction had decided to join. And I cannot tell you how shameful the stuff that was said to them was. It was outrageous. And what's interesting is something you've both touched on. Of course it came, sorry, not all men, of course it came from the dudes, right, who had to protect their territory by pissing on these women, but it also came from women, not all, again, not everybody, but who were like, well, this isn't feminist, why are you doing this? And those women left. They came in for a little while and they left. They were not made welcome. And it was eye-opening for me. And it was eye-opening for me to see that if you centered women, you could do all this stuff as long as it still centered men. But once you centered women, it became suspect and not as important.
I have such a complicated, I mean, it's so ironic that we sold this trilogy to Tor in 2018, because 2017 was the year where I had so many horrible experiences on Twitter and with people who I respected just breaking my heart with how dismissive and nasty they were being about the genre. And I was like, fine, I give up. I cede my citizenship in this community. I am going to go live in the romance world because the romance people don't want to give me shit about writing science fiction and fantasy. I mean, some of them think it's weird, but lots of them love it. There's romance readers like read everything. And so there's a huge community that I mostly just spend my time in the romance community who read science fiction and fantasy and paranormal and apocalyptic and dystopian. And so I was so nervous. We sold this book to Tor and I thought, okay, I'm going to have to tiptoe back in here. And it's like I've got my eyes covered. I'm wandering everywhere. I don't want to join the forums. I don't want to look at things because it's just hurtful to see people that whose work you love when they just sort of backhand you. And I understand the need to distance yourself from the reputation that romance has as a genre, because it has one that is just mocked. But you know, and it's silly because we didn't write a different book for Tor than we ever write. We wrote a book that is, it's got explosions and action and adventure and romance and
speculation. It has speculation, considered speculation about what the near future would look like.
And you know, that's what we've always done. It's just, you know, people have a narrow idea. Like, once you're gonna have a romance in there, and I think it's partly because if you have so little respect for the idea of romance as a genre, when you have to write a romance arc in another series, and like someone who's not from that world, you don't respect it as a craft. And so you end up with Star Wars movies with these romances in them that are so awful that I just want to pull out with my bare hands, because it's an art. And if you don't practice it and you don't respect it, you're going to write crappy romance and you're going to shove it into things where it doesn't belong. And then people are going to hate it. Of course they are. It's badly done. Why wouldn't you hate it?
Yeah. If you think, oh, anyone can do that, I'll just, you'll never write a good romance, and then you'll blame romance for your own failings when it has nothing to do with romance at all. And I want to actually double down on what you said, because romance readers are the least judgmental in the broadest sense. They'll read widely. Not everybody will, obviously. Some people have their, want to just read whatever, but they're the most adventurous readers, or at least they were back in the day. I think some of that is changing now in science fiction and fantasy. I'm seeing some significant changes just in the last 5 years, and more openness and more people excited about stories that have, I think about Amal Al-Mutar and Max Gladstone's Time Wars, right?
Yeah.
Which has at its core a love story and the excitement about that novella. Whereas 10 years ago, it might have been, well, it was nice, but there was too much, love stuff. It needed to be more,
I will say that the response to our book has been, I mean, nowhere near like what I feared. I do think that there's a shift, and it's, and like, I feel like I need to disclaim this because I always have to do this. I don't think every book should have romance in it.
Right. No, no.
Like, people always think when I say don't say that romance is bad, you're like, well, not everything needs romance. Of course I don't think everything needs romance. There are some books that I wish the romance wasn't in them, because I think it was, a distraction. It was probably put in there by rote unnecessarily. But when you write it because it's what the story needs, then, I mean, it's fabulous.
Yeah.
And I've seen a lot more of it. And, maybe it's partly we've got like the fan fiction crowd, the people who grew up on fan fiction. It's always been sort of funny to me, because I was one of those people, because I came from science fiction and fantasy, and I had a very skewed idea of what romance was. And I kept telling Donna, I don't read romance. And she's like, we wrote because you write shipper fic, Brie. You are a romance author already. And I was like, oh, okay, yeah, I guess. So I do love that.
Yeah, I agree about what you said about fan fiction. I think there's a whole generation now of people getting published who did grow up with fan fiction, who read it early and who read it at a time when it was available online, so it could be read more widely. And, back in the early days, it had to be mimeographed or printed and handed out, right?
Yeah, people were putting together zines and,
Yeah, which in its own way is a cool thing, but it was very much looked down on. But then when something gets so big, what are you going to do? You can't, it's so large and so pervasive and so influential now that I think people who are dismissive of fan fiction, who are writing or want to be writers, do so at their own peril.
Yeah.
Yes, I feel like I'm in that sort of middle generation. I was raised by the zine generation as a fangirl. But I'm like the GeoCities generation.
Oh my gosh, yes.
I had to learn I have a computer science degree because of fanfic. I mean, I taught myself how to program because I wanted to archive fan fiction more efficiently. So
It's true.
Yeah.
Wow.
So I'm definitely made by fanfic. That is, in every way, as a writer, as a programmer,
And yeah, I mean, like Bree and I met because we were writing fan fiction in the same, in the same fandom at the same time. And, it just happened to be like a newly forming fandom where, people were kind of like finding their little niches and breaking off into like groups and just kind of joining together when you have that whole, crystallization process that happens when people are like, I like this aspect of it. I like this aspect. No, I like this. And, sometimes they border each other and sometimes they cross over, but, you're in it for different things. And we were absolutely in it for, the romance. So we definitely like our little group there was like, yep, everything is like romancy. It was like hella shipper fic. And Bree's all, I don't read romance. I'm like, girl, what? Yeah, you do. Yeah, you do.
What can I ask? You don't have to answer. Can I ask what fandom it was?
You can answer. Donna, you want to answer?
It was the X-Men movie fandom when the first X-Men movie came out.
Oh,
yeah.
Now you're dating yourselves.
Yeah, we are.
Oh, it was like 20 years ago.
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
I remember seeing it.
Yeah.
Actually, I remember seeing it is because I took my kids who were then all, I don't know, whatever, they were young. They were old enough to go see that film, but not old enough to go see it without me. And
Right.
I'm notorious about films because I will just say at the end of a film, that sucked, right? So I remember the lights came up after the X1 and they're lined up right over to my side and they all go. And I go, wow, I really like that. And they're like, oh. So anyway, yeah.
The thing that I think was
movie.
like, I think that movie like really, the fact that they spent so much time, they really wanted to get into, like the characterization instead of just, focusing entirely on, like the superhero powers and everything. I think I really enjoyed that about the first movie. They lost it after that, but it
I
was
like the
really
second
nice.
one, but the third one is dead to me.
Yeah.
Like, I don't even remember what happened. I've blocked it out of my mind
It doesn't
so
exist.
thoroughly.
It doesn't
Yeah,
exist.
I don't.
Yeah.
It's like The Godfather 3. It's like, what?
Yeah.
Why are you talking about something that never happened? I don't understand. That doesn't exist. But that's how I am. There's some PlayStation stuff happening in the background. Bree, you talk. I'm going to mute myself for a minute.
Okay. So what else should we talk about? I think that there was we were talking about
There was a lot about Anne McCaffrey.
Oh, Anne McCaffrey. And I mean,
when I was young.
Pern was one of my, I joined, I ran a writing club, so I loved those books, deeply loved those books. Oh, we're getting some help, teams and ensemble books from the chat. Ensembles, let's talk about writing ensembles.
Let's talk about writing ensembles. Okay, we're moving on. We're transitioning from sex to ensembles.
Which could go back to sex again if
Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, it's actually in romance it's very sort of common. You need a brotherhood or a sisterhood or something so you can get your sequel books.
Yeah, it's common because it's built-in sequel bait.
But it didn't used to be. This is something that came in.
Yeah.
I'm not good at in the 80s or 90s that this started. The family members, all the sisters and brothers will get their story, or the brothers, the brotherhood, the sisterhood. So I feel like it didn't used to be the case back in the day. And then it happened, and it's actually great.
There were some, you could find it sometimes in romance, particularly back in the day, back in the 80s, when they had a lot more category lines is what they're called. They're basically pretty much only Harlequin does them now, and they have like their particular lines, and they'll, you know, release like a certain number of books in the line like every month. And it used to actually be like a subscription service where you would like, you know, order the books and they would just send them to your house. And so you were really shopping by line instead of even wanting particular authors or titles, you know. So it was a really interesting experience. But a lot of the authors who really, like, you know, wrote for those lines over and over again would do things like put together kind of unofficial series where they would have ensemble casts that they had created, and then they would just kind of like, you know, write a book about every single person in this, you know, ensemble cast. Kay Hooper did it in her Bantam Love Swept series. She would do it a lot in like the various lines that she wrote for. Of course, she, you know, does not write romance anymore, which is very sad to me, but she did it. It's just nowhere. It was nowhere. You had to really pick and choose and look and find those things because, you know, like I said, most of them were unofficial. So they weren't even labeled as series. So you just kind of had to pick it up and be like, I remember this character from a previous book, or, you know, just get lucky. So glad that people are actually like doing branded series now where they start off with an ensemble cast, because it's my favorite thing in the world. Because then I'm like, okay, yeah, all right. Oh my gosh. Oh, there's so many, you know, there's so many that I can look forward to.
Well, because
So I
it's
really
how
love
we
that.
live in the world, isn't it? We
Right.
live and we have groups of people. We don't like have one relationship with one person and that's our whole life. And so to me, ensemble casts, for one thing, ensemble casts are more realistic to the way we all function, or most people function in the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think, you know, in romance, I actually think it's the speculative romance where the series and the ensemble cast really thrive, because it's sort of that, you know, you're going to build this world and you don't want to just throw it away after one book.
Yeah.
If you've got a really compelling world and a hook and you do all this world building, the way romance works is usually you have one couple and you follow their story to the end. And they don't write one character with multiple books as often. It definitely happens. Like Alana Andrews does great ones that are trilogies with one character. But I think that the ensembles give you a great way to both, like what we do is we develop people's relationships sort of organically over the series. Just because the second book has these, you know, two characters, that doesn't mean their first interactions are going to happen in that second book or the third. You know, it gives us a chance to sort of layer in, you know, their interactions and their relationship and let stuff sort of slowly boil, and different dynamics in the background, and plus friendship. I love writing about friendship. Platonic love is, you know, so important. And I was thinking about that this morning, thinking about how people are always saying, I want more books about platonic love instead of romance. And I was thinking, I want more romances with platonic love emphasized, because, you know, what do we call it when your significant other, you know, separates you from everyone but them? We don't call that a good thing.
Yeah.
You know, you should have strong relationships that give you a support base outside of this other person.
But I have seen a shift in that as well. This idea that it used to be the man himself was enough for the woman, that her whole life, he would be her whole life. But now it's like, now I'm seeing this huge shift to she has a life and he becomes part of it, which I love, because I'm like super big on friendship and specifically female friendship, because there was so little of that, almost none of that when I was starting out. It wasn't considered important enough. It still is a struggle for me to find male writers who write female friendship in a way that I find believable and compelling and as deep as I see other people writing about it. But one of the things that strikes me about ensemble casts is just what you said, that you can build up these characters with little things in an earlier book before you focus on them. And watching TV shows have shifted so much from back in the day when the episode had to be completely self-contained. I call it the gun smoke kind of thing, right? Where there was something happened and they solved it, and then the next episode it was a reset, right? But now I have to watch a whole thing, and little things, and I watch how TV will set up. There'll be like one little look between two characters in episode 2, and then in episode 4 that will become an interaction, and then in episode 6 now that it'll become the focus of episode 6. And it's such a good way to think about writing ensembles in fiction as well.
Yeah. It makes me think of how, I don't know if you ever watched Almost Human. It was one of the many sci-fi shows Fox gave one season to, totally killed, neglected, and then canceled. But it was a series about a human cop and his AI partner. And the entire focus of the series was just relationship building between them. And they aired the series out of order. They thought they could just do this procedural crime of the week thing. And so I was like, why is this so incoherent? Some episodes, the guy's like helping him with his drug addiction. The next one, he's over it. The next one, he's got it again. And then I realized they were out of order, and the entire beautiful arc of all of these characters learning each other, this relationship between them building, had just been scattered. And I was thinking, who would do that? Why?
Well, the same people who, and someone said this in chat, the same people who did it with Firefly, where they originally showed.
And I see someone said, leverage. They damage leverage, and Fox does this. I mean, Fox is just pitch, Sleepy Hollow. They just get these shows and then they ruin them. I don't know what.
Sleepy Hollow was a crime against nature. What they did to Sleepy Hollow was a crime against nature. I'm going to say it right now. It was awful. They should all be fired for what they did.
Even that Minority Report show, like, I didn't think you could make a TV show that would make me not be mad at the Minority Report concept.
Somebody in chat says Sleepy Hollow was canceled after season 1. You're right. I'm sorry. My bad. It didn't exist after season 1.
Yeah.
Horrible. Tragic.
So, yeah, let's not go too long on all of the terror. I just don't know. Someone over there is, like, greenlighting these amazing concepts and letting people hire amazing actors, and then someone else is just killing them.
Yeah.
It's terrible. I don't know.
You know what? You could just, like, envision an entire, like, you could turn that into, like, a relationship right there. Like, who is green lighting these awesome things and who is destroying them, and what is their contention with one another? I mean, let's chalk it up to something more interesting than, incompetence. So that's how my brain works.
I've been watching Lost. Maybe it's one of those epic battles between two people. So speaking of shows that went bananas.
Ugh.
So what were yours? So when you wrote Deal with the Devil, you knew you.
Oh, right. We should talk about our books.
We should talk about books. Yeah. Yeah. Sorry. How did you, to some degree, plot what you were going to do with some elements of the ensemble? You knew what you were going to do all the way through, and then seeded it the way you wanted to, or did you just kind of go as you kind of?
Oh, absolutely. The whole, we've got the relationships for the second 2 books, and the general plot arc were part of our proposal. Mm-hmm. So we were like, okay, when we built our ensembles, we built them, put them together in certain ways so that they fit, and not only fit together on a book by book basis, but fit together in the time frame, because what Bree was saying about how with ensemble casts and writing romances between these characters that happen later, you can sort of lay the groundwork within earlier books. The only real caveat to that, and I don't know, it's probably not a thing in sci-fi or fantasy, but it's definitely a romance thing, which is the one thing you can't do is you can't go beyond like a certain point, like a breaking point where something has to change in their relationship, because that's a their book thing, you know.
Oh,
And
I see what you're
so
saying. Yeah.
they reach a
their
point.
book has to start when something changes.
Right.
Right.
You know, that's the start of their story, when something changes.
Yeah.
So you have to, I've like described it as like trying to launch multiple ships at the same time, and you have to do all the math to time them so that they reach where they need to be at different times. So when we started this first book, we knew that the first couple had to get to their resolution in the book, and the second couple had to start and then get to the resolution in the second book, and the third couple has to go the longest and slow burn the most.
Yeah.
So,
which is fun. That's my favorite.
Yeah.
That's always my favorite, is like actually like getting to the point where you have these people who have been like set up for so long, because it really is a delicate thing. You can't just not have them get together because, you know, I mean, like, because there's this idea, you know, with like a happily ever after, an impending happily ever after, that these people are just like, you know, right for each other, and that it's not necessarily as much of a situational thing as, you know, I think we tend to see, like, you know, in real life between people. You know, there are absolutely people who it's just bad timing. Well, you know, I mean, like, that's a little bit harder to pull off, like, in a book. Like, if we tried to, like, keep people apart just because, our editor would probably be like, I don't buy it. You know, so we have to, you know, we have to go the distance a little more with that, and what's keeping them apart, what personal issues do they have that, you know, they haven't addressed yet, where they haven't gotten to a point where they, you know, are ready to begin the process of being together. So it is a delicate, delicate dance, but I love that part of it. Like, trying to lay the groundwork for why these folks aren't together yet is almost as much fun for me as, like, you know, them actually like getting together. I love that dance.
Yeah.
When they're like just circling.
Well, and it also gets back to something from Bree's tweet, right? Which is how consensual sex, and everything that leads up to it,
right,
is actually a great way to investigate character, a great way to illuminate character and to show people changing and to show people getting to know each other. And it doesn't have to just be violence or negativity. That's not the only path for character development. And, you know, so.
And it showcases the world too. You explore, I mean, if you think about our politics, how many of our wedge issues have something to do with sex or romance, reproduction, marriage? I mean, thinking that you can build a world without investigating who's allowed to love, how are they allowed, who's allowed to marry, what are the implications of that, you know, how do you deal with gender, how do you deal with sexuality? I mean, ignoring that stuff or thinking that you can just build a world just replicates all the terrible baggage that we have. And, you know, honestly, if you want to build a world where consent matters, that is a world building exercise, because we do not live in one.
Nope.
We do not live in a world that has reckoned properly with consent and with, you know, how to engage with that healthfully. So
and it's fascinating with science fiction and fantasy, and science fiction in particular, this idea of what is real world building, what is real speculative fiction. And there was a time when it could only be physics, right? It could only be real science fiction if you're asking yourself a physics question. Could there be
social sciences didn't count?
They didn't count. But actually, those are nifty concepts. Those are technology concepts, which are important. But change is in a different place. Change is in a social place.
That actually reminds me, like, what you were saying, and also what Bree said about how does your society handle gender. It actually reminded me that I wanted to ask you what specific things you ran into when you decided that you were going to, you know, take Alexander the Great, only, you know, Alexander the Great is not a dude anymore. Like, did you feel like you had to craft your societies in a way where that was even possible? Or did it just, turn into an exercise where you were, step by step exploring the different reactions to, if Alexander the Great was not a guy?
So before you answer that, can I just say, actually, that's the top question, and I was just about to change to ask you this question, which was, can you talk about? It? Yeah, good job, Donna. The world building that went into Unconquerable Sun, especially taking historical events and putting them in a wildly different context, space opera context.
So there may be some people listening to this who have seen me do previous events, so I apologize. You're about to hear the same answer, because there is actually an answer to this. So the first question I had to ask myself when I began to seriously world build this, and I knew that I wanted to gender swap it, was, ancient Greece and ancient Macedon, which was not exactly Greece, but adjacent, Greek adjacent, they were patriarchal worlds. It's always more complicated than that, but they were patriarchal worlds. Men ruled the military. In Macedon, the military rule was paramount. If you couldn't be king, if you couldn't lead the army and fight, I mean, yourself literally lead the army. And so the first thing I had to decide, if I'm going to do Alexander the Great in space and swap it, which story am I telling? Am I telling, I am such a fearless, amazing leader that I can overcome all this prejudice and become the leader? But once you do that, then you're not telling a story. They're not telling Alexander's story anymore, because Alexander never, his fitness to lead there were specific political things going on, right? I want to ignore those for the moment. His fitness to lead an army on this amazing conquest was never, ever questioned, ever. He was a man. He had proved himself in battle. He was the heir. He had learned all the things and been taught all those things. And so for me, the first place I had to start was that gender had to not be a status vector. It couldn't be part of the hierarchy, because you had to have a hierarchy to have the Macedonian, to have conquest and war. You have to have a hierarchy. I'm just gonna say that flat out, right? But gender couldn't be part of it. So it's not that people don't think about gender. It's not that there aren't gender issues, because I don't think I could even possibly write that. I don't think I can get and scrub that out of me, right? But gender's not status. So now the world, gender's not status. And that's the basis on which I had to build everything else. So yeah, awesome. So nobody thinks. So the character son, nobody second guesses. And Alexander's father, who's named Philip, he is her mother, Eirene, because I wanted to do a mother-daughter, a difficult mother-daughter relationship, because we usually see that father-son relationship, right? And again, she's also, nobody questions, it's just like, oh yeah, right?
Yeah.
And that is one of the most speculative elements in that book, because it is not like our world at all.
Yeah, no. Yeah, no. Not at all. What else are we not?
Okay, let me check this next. Here's a question for us. As writers under a deliberate pseudonym, what are your thoughts on the Reclaim Her Name project? Have you guys heard of that? Which is republishing female authors like George Eliot under their real names. I have complicated feelings about it. I think that,
I don't think it has a whole lot to do with us.
Yeah.
It doesn't have anything to do with the reason why we, chose a pseudonym. We had both worked in bookstores, and in my case, libraries. And so, it was a practical decision for us. If we were going to write a book together, we didn't want somebody to be trying to find this book and not sure whose name it was under.
Bridges or H for hair.
Yeah. But I think that the project itself, I think it depends on who you're talking to and who you're asking, because for the most part, they can't go back and ask, if these folks want those changed. And I think that, sometimes there's a lot of presumption that happens. There absolutely have been women who wrote and published under, male pseudonyms because it was the only way for them to, have their work published. But I think that, sometimes the question was a little bit more complicated than that. Are we assuming they were women? Are we making assumptions about how they wanted their legacies to carry on and be remembered? In some cases, I think we are. So I think that, I would, be hesitant to want to wholeheartedly say, yes, I think that needs to happen in every single circumstance. I want to know the gray areas there. I want to know the nuances. But again, not really any reasoning behind, like our particular, name choice. We were just going for expedience.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, no, I agree with what you said about the reclaim. There's a lot we don't know.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
important not to think that we know and that we can
Yeah.
judge. Yes.
Not to make assumptions because, it's just, I don't think that serves anybody.
Anna has asked if we can say how Beverly Jenkins helped bring Deal with the Devil to life. I will tell the short version of that story, which is that when in 2018, we were trying to decide if we wanted to query agents because we were thinking we're really tired of self-publishing. Maybe we wanted to try working with a publisher, but I didn't really know how someone who is, a best-selling indie author does that. Did we need to write a book first, or could we just go and say, hey, agent, yo, what up? So I sent Beverly Jenkins a message because I was talking to her, I think maybe about something else, or I wanted to ask her about her agent. And I said, do you think that she would want us to submit a whole book first? And she said, wait, I'm going to text her. So she texted her agent, Nancy, and Nancy happened to still be in the office with Sarah, who is Sarah Younger, who is our agent now. And Sarah apparently got really excited because she is a fan of our work and she had read all of our books and she wanted to represent us, and she said, please let me do that. And so
she called dibs, basically.
Yeah, so Bev texted or DM'd me back and said, oh, Sarah would like to talk to you. And so we talked to Sarah the next day. I mean, just that fast. And she was brilliant. She understood us. She had a vision already. She had a pitch list for an imaginary book that we might go out with. I mean, she saw where she wanted to place us. And the next day we signed with her. And I think Bev went back and looked. That was in February. In May, she went out with our proposal and sold it in 12 days. So none of this would have happened if Beverly Jenkins hadn't sent that text. So that's why the book is dedicated to her.
Yep.
So someone asked, who is a female sci-fi or fantasy author you'd recommend for strong romantic thread in her books? Do you want to start that one, Kate?
Well, it's Jacqueline Carey.
Definitely.
Who really, I'll just say, euphemistically created an earthquake in the field when she published Kushiel's Dart. So that's just offhand, I would say her. I also always want to give out a shout out to 100,000 Kingdoms by N.K. Jemisin because it has tentacle porn in it. That may not be, it's not, that's complicated.
Is that the reason?
That's complicated and not as positively consensual as it might be, but she always writes great investigations of sexuality.
If I think of a couple more from the romance side, but I still, science fiction and fantasy, Nalini Singh. I love Nalini Singh. She writes fabulous, paranormal romances that are sort of like, if Vulcans and shapeshifters collided. That's like psychic Vulcans. And I love those. Milla Vane has a Barbarian series, which is sort of like Game of Thrones for people who don't like rape. That's my elevator pitch for that there.
How's
And
her last name spelled?
Vane, Vane.
Okay.
Milla, Milla. She has got 2 books out right now. The second one just came out. And the series is called A Gathering of Dragons. And it's super awesome. I think there's a novella as well. If you like space opera, Jessie Mihalik.
Oh, yep.
She wrote a
Took
trilogy.
mine. Dang it.
Okay, Donna, you talk about Jessie.
Jessie Mihalik, who, thank you, though, for pronouncing her name, because I always forget how it's pronounced. And she has to correct me every single time because I suck.
may have made it wrong. Sorry, Jessie.
I think it was Mihalik, actually. Mihalik. Oh, God. We both screwed it up now. Okay, great. No, Jessie Mihalik has the best, I love her too much. You're going to have to take it, Brie. I'm going to go just read it.
Basically, it's 3 space princess sisters who are trying to dismantle their family's corrupt legacy.
I love it.
That was so good. It's like you're a professional.
My blurb is actually on the front of the first book.
Oh, okay.
Her debut, our agent, we share an agent, and our agent sent it to us, and we both, Donna and I actually have very different taste. We rarely like the same books, which is funny. But we both loved this book, and the badass space princess adventure we deserve is right across the heroine's butt on the first book, which is excellent placement, and I want that in all future blurbs.
Yeah.
So good real estate.
I think the second book, let's see, 1, 3, and then 2.
Is that your order?
1, 3. Yeah, that's my order. It's not your order. I know your order's different. 2 is yours. Yeah. So our taste is still somewhat different. Just we both loved her magical trilogy.
We sort of just answered this. Diana would like more epic fantasy, some non-cis white dude authors, both past and present, who should get more recognition. And we definitely just listed quite a few that we like.
Yeah.
Do you have any past favorites?
I do, and I always fail to figure out what they are when I'm asked on the spur of the moment. And in an hour, I'll have 10 examples.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, I think we did just list quite a few.
Yeah, there were several.
And, I can always keep going. There was one I'm trying to... I'm going to say Tasha Suri. If you guys haven't read Tasha Suri, it's Empire of Sand is the first one. And then
yeah. Great example. Great
oh my gosh. This is if you're not super into the explicit sex, this is a slow burn romance. It would sort of fade to black. It's not really explicit, but it is still the yearning in it. It's that sort of book where by the time they touch fingers, you're ready to just die.
Yeah.
And it's beautiful and haunting. And the second book made me cry. That sort of, she's good. She's got another book coming out that I'm really excited about. So that's one person I think needs pay attention to her. She's a star. So we have one more question in here, and if you guys want any more questions, we're about to wrap up so this is probably going to be the last one.
Yeah.
Okay.
Lisa asked if the nature of the mercenary librarian trade will be expanded upon in the next book. And yes, they're building a library, and I think in some ways, they're not going to do necessarily just things that people envision librarians doing now, because it's a different time and their community has different needs. So a lot of the things they're going to be doing are things that librarians do now, but don't get a lot of recognition and credit for, like helping the community, organizing resources and stuff. But they did discover a nice treasure trove of books, so there will be more book content in the next one, now that they got their Baker and Taylor order in. I guess it's hard to do acquisitions when you have to really go out and dig the books up, Indiana Jones style. So
literally dig them up.
All right, people, there's time for, if anyone has one more quick question, this is the time.
This is all you get.
Oh, good. The people are putting the links in to these books in the
Yeah, Rachel's on it, man.
Yeah, very good
She is.
job.
She's on top
Yeah.
of it. It's
Yeah.
awesome.
I'm
So
impressed.
yeah, all of the books that we've mentioned, there are links in there.
Thank you for joining us, all you people
Oh!
who joined us.
Somebody who used to write X-Men fanfic with us.
Oh,
Her
look.
friend said hi.
Hi.
I remember Pam.
Oh.
I do. So
I remember Pam as well. Yeah.
so
That's
yay!
great.
Well, thank you, everyone. I hope I was able to get all the recommendations. And if I missed any, you can watch this recording on our YouTube channel. It should be available on Monday. The link to the channel is in the chat. So, like and subscribe and comment.
Thank you,
Well,
Rachel.
Thank
Thank
you.
you guys so
Thank
much.
you
Hidden
so
Jill.
much.
Well, it was a pleasure to host all of you. Please consider purchasing a copy of Unconquerable Sun and Deal with the Devil by visiting us at powells.com. A link to the books are also available in the chat. And while you're there, please be sure to check out our lineup of other upcoming virtual events. We look forward to seeing you at another one again soon. Take care until then.
Thank you
you.
guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.